you very much to attend this session to Power Platform Fresh Summit. My goal for today is talking about Business Central and the Power Platform to mix it together. My name is Stefano Demiliani. I'm an MVP from Italy, and I work on the Business Central and the Azure staff side. This is the agenda that I planned for this session. We'll focus our attention today in this session on the Power Platform together with Business Central. We'll see an overview of Business Central and the Power Platform, what you can do. We'll have an overview of what you can do with Business Central and CDS or Dataverse with the name. We'll see how to create custom connectors for Business Central and the Power Platform. And then we'll see an overview of a preview features that permits you to expose Business Central entities as a virtual entity on CDS. So my goal for today is giving you all the information that you need to work with the Power Platform and Business Central. As an introduction, I think that if you are here, you already know what is the Power Platform. It's a low-code platform that spans Office 365, Azure, and Dynamics 365 products. The Power Platform is mainly composed of 4 main products. Our attention today will be on Power Automate and Power Apps and Dataverse, the new name of the common data service, mainly Cologne. And we'll see how you can do and work with them. Obviously, the other side of our attention today is Business Central. Business Central is a cloud-based ERP released from Microsoft in the Dynamics 365 suite of products. Business Central is an important piece in the business world for over a much more big ecosystem that spans from all the Dynamics 365 products, so like CRM, sales, and so on, and Office 365 products, and obviously the Power Platform. So you should see a complete scenarios that goes more outside of the box of the single products. And all these products are integrated between them. And obviously, one of the important layers of the communication between them is the common data service or the Dataverse product, Dataverse database, because always more these products will be integrating by using Dataverse. Speaking about mainly about Business Central, the Power Platform relies on connectors. I think that you know them. And the Business Central is actually one of the available connectors that you have with the Power Platform. It's available as a premium connector, so you need to have a certain type of license for using it. And the standard connector for Business Central is available for Power Apps, Power Automate, and Azure Logic Apps. The name is where you can find the connector is Business Central, and you can simply, if you want to integrate your Power Platform products with the Business Central, you can simply rely on this connector. So select them, click on Create. It creates a new connections, and you can start using Business Central entities. The Business Central connectors relies on OData and APIs. So what you see from Business Central is not the entire database, but you see only entities exposed as OData, so as APIs. And as a default, the standard connector relies on some default entities that the standard platform exposes to you. And these entities are normally actually 52 entities exposed via these connectors. So you have all the main entities of the ERP, like customer, vendors, sales orders, purchase orders, and so on. And you have also approval templates that permits you to automate and customize your approval workflows inside the ERP. So, for example, to approve the creation of a customers or a vendor, or approval the release of a sales order of the incoming purchase order or something like that. The connectors exposes entities, supports all the business functions related to these entities. So if you have a code inside Business Central that does something, the connector supports them. So you don't need to rewrite codes. And the connector has a read-write capable feature. So you can create and read data. And important that all is exposed as all data before entities. And the Business Central connector has obviously actions and triggers. And when you use the Business Central connector for the Power Automate and Power Apps, you need to specify two important parameters. One is the environment name. The environment name is the name of the Business Central environment you have in the cloud. So, for example, the production environment or the name of one of the available sandbox environment you can have. And the other important parameter is the company name, because the Business Central has a database where each company has a separate objects, and you need to specify the company name because it's the name of the company where you work, so where your flow or where your Power Apps will work. When you select the Business Central connector, you have a set of actions available, so triggers that starts something. Triggers relies on modification of entities, so when an entity is changed or creating or deleted, and also when approvals start. So, for example, when a vendor approval is requested or when a purchase document is requested or something like that. So these are the available triggers that you can have in the standard connectors. Instead, then we see more in depth the single products. So Power Automate is one of the products integrating to Business Central, and Power Automate is extremely important for defining low-code workflows that you can integrate with your ERP. Power Automate is natively embedded in Business Central for the approval processes. So you have a lot of entities where you can directly on the entities select the request approval, and then a Power Automate flow starts. These are the entities where a standard a request approval is exposed. So, for example, the item card, the customer card, the vendor card, or the sales quote, and so on, have a flow for approvals. And when you click, you can, to start them, you can simply click on request approval menu inside Business Central, and then you can select a approval template, one or more. It depends by you if you have more than one approvals created or only one, and then you can start the workflow. Important here is that you can also directly click the create a flow button, and then you are redirected to Power Automate, and you can directly create your flow in Power Automate, save that flow, and the flow is saved into Business Central natively. So all is integrated. I didn't know that to know nothing. So, for example, for the customer approval, you can simply go into the customer card. You can create a flow from here. You can select an existing flow template. So you can start from a template, the request approval for a customer, for example. When you select them directly inside Business Central, you can specify the connections. So the Business Central connectors opens. You need to specify the credentials for your tenant that are normally, if you are just logged into the tenant, these credentials are inherited. And then you can specify your Outlook accounts, for example, or your mail account for notifications. And then you can specify parameter, so conditions for your approvals. For example, you can select the environment name. You can specify conditions related to data. So, for example, if I want that an approval starts for customer only if the credit limit of the customer is more than a particular variables, or so on. So you can specify filters and conditions for triggering your approvals. And then when your definition is okay, you have a complete editing of your flow that you can directly customize inside the Power Automate. So you have the standard actions, the approval that starts, and you have the normally two branches, yes branch and no branch, that defines what happens if the approval is okay and what happens if the approval is not okay. And you can simply add more actions here, customize here, and when you save, the workflow is saved inside Business Central, and you are ready to go with your approval customer. So much more easy, much more user-friendly than before, where the approvals are only defined inside Business Central. Another important action that you can do is in Business Central, you can obviously you can integrate Power Automate with all the type of flow that you have. One interesting flow is in Power Automate is the instant flow that permits you to execute tasks simply by tapping, for example, a button on your mobile device. And you can also use instant flows for Business Central. For example, if you want to have a mobile application that quickly permits you to your agents or your employee to directly save something inside Business Central, you can create an instant flow that permits you to create information, send information from your mobile device, and then redirect them to Business Central. An important part when you use Power Automate with Business Central is monitoring, because sometimes flows can fail, obviously, and failure of a flow is not always done by the environment, but maybe is there are business rules that makes the flow fails. And normally in a fail you have an activity box where you can click on failures and you can click select see all your workflows that are failed, and for each workflow that is failed you can see the action that was failed. And for example, like in this example, the error code of the action failed, the create record, says you that, for example, a number series of customer creation for the customers does not permit you to automatically numbering customers. So it's a business logic that does your work of fail, and you should always remember to monitor them, because sometimes workflows can fail not for problems due of code or the environment, but for business logic that are changed inside your environment. So this is a tip that I want always to remember. As said before, Business Central relies and integrates with the Power Platform with connectors. So you have a Business Central connector available for Power Automate, Power Apps, and so on. The limits of the standard connector is that standard connector permits you to see and expose only standard entities created by Microsoft and with the details created by Microsoft. So as an example, you have, for example, customers, you have vendors, and lots of other entities. But sometimes you require more. So sometimes you have normally two problems. First problem that you can have is that I want a detail of a customer, for example, of a standard entities that is not present inside the standard custom connector. So for example, if I add a new field inside the customer table, I would like to see this new field on my Power Automate or on my Power Apps application. And you cannot do that with the standard connector because you cannot modify the standard connector. And the other problem that normally you can have is you want to expose a new table, a new entity that you create in Business Central. Imagine that you create a new entity called task, and you want to expose that entity to the connectors for using in Power Automate and Power Apps. You cannot expose a new entities, your custom entity with the standard connector, because the standard connector see only entities defined by Microsoft. So what you need to do in this case is to create a custom connector. The custom connectors permits you to expose, always relies on APIs, so relies on REST APIs that you need to define, and permits you to add the custom entities and create new entities with new details of standard entities. When you create a custom connectors, and later we'll see how to do that practically, custom connectors normally aren't available to other users, and you need to share them with users if you want to share apps or share it in your organizations. So when you have a custom connector, when you define the custom connector, you need to invite other users to this connector and then specify, for example, the team or the group of your users, and then the permissions that your user has on this connector. So only can view or can edit or can also they share the connectors. And remember that custom connectors, if you are using Logic Apps, so a subset of Power Automate, a superset, sorry, of Power Automate. Custom connector and logic app are visible and available to the connector's authors and users, and all the users who has the same Azure Active Directory tenant and subscriptions. So you don't have the needs to share the connectors in Power Automate, in Logic Apps, if you create them with Logic Apps. Another question that normally is present is, can I embed flow on Power Apps, mainly Power Apps, inside Business Central page? Actually, you can only share apps. It's currently not possible to embed apps inside Business Central. This is something planned for the future. But actually, if you want to embed Canvas apps, for example, into Business Central, you need to do an indirect way. So, for example, you need to embed them first into a Power BI dashboard, and then embed that Power BI and the applications into Business Central. So you have not an active way to embed the Power Apps inside a Business Central page. Just to see some of this concept in actions, let me open my browser here. And as you can see, here is, I try to zoom a bit. Here I have, I start with Power Automate. Here I have Power Automate with where in my flows I created some flows that uses the standard connector. So, for example, one of the framework I created before is the low inventory notification flow, for example. In this flow, I use the standard connector with Business Central, as you can see here. So connectors, in the available connectors, is the connector that this uses is a connector called Business Central. And with Business Central, as you can see, you have Business Central, as I said before, is a premium connector, and you have also the connector for the on-premise version of Business Central. So the version that runs on your on-premise network. And when the connector is selected, you need to obviously connect to the environment, and you can then create flow. So, for example, here I created a flow where for receiving notifications automatically when an item goes under a low inventory value. So the flow starts with a trigger that in my case is when a record is changed. And as said before, you have always to specify two important parameters. They are the environment name and the company name, and then the entity that where it works. In my case, is items. So when an item record is changed on this environment, so in the sandbox environment and in a company called Cronus, then there are actions. The action is the get record action. So I'm retrieving the item, the modified item, and then I'm checking conditions. So my condition is if here I'm filtering for an item, so I'm checking only these items. This is an item in Business Central. So I check if the item number, if the item number is this number, then I have two branches, yes and no. If no, I don't do nothing. If yes, I'm checking inventory. So inventory is one of the available fields in the standard items entity. So I check if the inventory is less than a value, for example, 3, is less than 3, you can send a notification to your user. For example, an email, a mobile notification, or you can do more. So you have all available the available fields of your entities, and also you have inventories. I use inventory because inventory is normally in Business Central a calculated fields. So it's a field that is calculated each time you use an item, because it goes on the item ledger entry table and calculates the data. So it's a dynamic data that changes everything, and you can use them inside your flow for doing actions. Another example, for example, is as I said before, is the manual trigger flow. So, for example, here I created a flow for manually trigger. So available, for example, in the mobile applications. And in this flow, when you define a mobile manually triggered flow, the nice part is that you can also define a easy user interface for permitting to your user to insert data. So, for example, in a user in my application, I want to permit to your user to create a customer from my mobile phone. For example, an agent that is always outside. He has no APC or the ERP here, and I want to permit you to create a customer that then can be approved from the company and then moved to a live customer. You can create an interface directly with Flow, with where your agent with a manually triggered flow, you can insert, for example, a field number, a company name, the address, the phone number, the email, and then an action create record starts by creating a record in the customer entity with the details filled by the manually triggered flow. And then, for example, a notification is sent to your user. What happens here is that if this is connected to my sandbox environment, my sandbox environment is Business Central, is this environment. So if I open customers, these are the customers that now I have. What happens with if I use this flow is that if I, for example, execute this flow, it's a manually triggered flow. So imagine that I am on my mobile device. I have here an interface where I can, for example, create a number of the customer, a company, right, an address, street, and a phone number, and maybe an email. Obviously, you can fill the value you want. You can do what you want here. And when the flow is executed, it connects to Business Central, creates the customers, sends a notification email to the user that starts the workflows, and when the workflows is completed, I should have an email notification that arrived in this moment. And if I go inside Business Central and I refresh this page, I should see a new customer created with the details I inserted, as you can see here. So quite useful if you want, for example, quickly create actions that interacts with your mobile users or something like that. And another last part, another interesting workflow that I want to signal here is the HTTP request flow, because with this you can do what you want, because you can send an API to your flows and then do things. Last part of this demo, I want to talk about the custom connector. So as said before, for many it's quite common that with Business Central you need to do custom connectors, because you don't have you want to expose custom entities or you want to modify standard entities. In this example, for example, I've as you can see on this environment, I select just to show, I created a new entity called task. This is where I can insert here some task. Imagine that this is not an entity, a custom entity created by me, so a table and the page and so on. And you can, I want to insert having an application that handles task, and I want to use this from Power Automate or from Power Apps. Imagine you want to use them for Power App, because I want to permit to my user to insert task from a Power Apps application, and then these tasks are saved into Business Central. Task is not a standard entities, so if I use the custom connector, if I use the standard connector, I will never be able to use tasks, this task entity because it's my entity. So what I have to do is to create a custom connector. To show this, I quickly show this what you need to do in. Sorry, let me change the settings in my here, because otherwise I have these are false error that my example is triggering because I have a code analyzers enabled. Okay. What I've done here, I don't go into much in depth on this because it's Business Central programming, and I want to talk about programming Business Central now. But here I define a table called task. Let's zoom a bit. This is a table called task with some fields: the task number, the description, the due date, the status, and so on. This table have a list page. This is a page defined in Business Central where you can interact with tasks. And to expose this table, this task table to the outside, to a custom connector, you need to create an API page, because this page, all the connectors relies on APIs. So what you need to create an API to expose this as an API, you can create an API page. So in Business Central, you can there's an object called page type API, where you can simply select. You can use a snippet for programming this. The snippet is the page, and then you can select the page of type API. And when you compile this, you have a skeleton where you can fill some parameters here. I talked about that. You can fill the name of the table that you want to expose here, and then here inside the repeater, you need to fill the fields that you want to expose. So to show how I created these APIs, I created a page of type API that works on the task table. These are the details that I want to expose. So I am exposing the task number field. And as exposed, this is the name of the field exposed. It's a JSON compatible format. So the description, the due date, and the status of the task. These are the data that are exposed. And an API needs some parameters. The first parameter are the entity name and the entity set name that you want to expose. That create the endpoint. So /tasks is the name of the APIs. And then you need to create other 3 parameters that are mandatory to define the URL of the APIs, that are the API publisher, the group, and the version of your API. This defines your custom URL to call your APIs, because if I want to call that APIs, a standard APIs, let me check this, a standard APIs answers in this format. So the URL of this or standard API is api.businesscentral.dynamics.com/version/your tenant ID /name of the environment /API /version of the API /entity. So for example, if you want to work with customers, the URL is this URL, name of the company /customers. But how you can differ a customer API created by Microsoft and the customer API created by you? This is the endpoint. So if I want to call my tasks, for example, I expose my entity, as you can see here, the entity is name of the publisher, so a fixed part of the URL, then name of the publisher, name of the group as defined in the API page, version as defined in the API page, name of the company, and then name of the entity set name that I defined in my page. So this defines the API that I need to expose. And as you can see, if I execute this, this is sending a request to Business Central, and Business Central accepts the request. And the response is a JSON object. This is JSON object has 2 parts, a data context field, and then a value field. The value field is an array of results, and inside this you have all the data. So I have a task number 001, task number 002, and so on. These are all the tasks that I have inside my tenant. You need to use this endpoint into your custom connector. So go back. When published, you have an API now available. And now we go back to our custom connectors. And we'll see how I create these connectors. Well, to create a custom connector is extremely easy. Simply go on data, create a new custom connector, fill the first parameter where you can the name and the image of your connector. Then in the first parameter, you need to fill the host. The host is api.businesscentral.dynamics.com. And then you need to fill the base URL. The base URL is version 2, tenant ID, name of the environment, API, and then your custom part of the API. So publisher, group, version. Then you have a security tab where you need to define authentication. You can work on auth authentication or basic, where you need to pass username and password. And then you are going to the definition. Definition, you need to create actions. So in this example, I create a get task action. In the get task action, simply define the method. So in my case, the method is a get. And click on import from sample and simply pass the response of the API, the JSON that this API returns to you here. And the custom connector magically can see that you have in the request, you have a set of parameters. Important is the URL of the request. As you can see here, the company is always a parameter because in Business Central, you can have one tenant with multiple companies. So when you define the action, the get action URL, in this case, it's important to specify the company. Sorry, let me go move. The company is specified here. It's important to specify the company as a parameter because you will use this parameter each time you use this connector. And the connector object has also a response. The response, click on add the default response, pass the JSON of the response. And when you pass the JSON of the response, you can see that it reads all the tags that you have in this JSON. And these are the fields that your response has. So quite very easy to create a custom connector. And then you can also test the connector. If your connector is created, you can test the operation. Simply fill the company ID that now I copy from here. This is my company ID. And if I want to test the connector, if the connector works, I can simply go here. Sorry, let me open the screen. Click test operation. The get operation is sent, and this is the response. The response is, as you can see, I have all the tasks. And then you can use this API. So, for example, on Power Apps, you can use, you can create an API that shows an API, sorry, applications that shows the task that you have inside your Business Central, and simply create a new application by selecting the custom connector, and all is available for you. Important is that, as you can see here, this application uses my custom connector, and important, what I want to show you is that this is the name of the connector. It's calling the get task method. It's passing the parameter, the company ID parameters, and to have the list of tasks in this gallery, you need to use the value methods, because as said before, if you simply call get tasks, it's giving a JSON with two parameters, value and data context. You need to retrieve the value, and the value is the array of tasks that you have inside your Business Central, and then you can start working with. So it's quite easy to work with custom connectors. Let's jump back to the slides because time is running. Another important topic that I want to quickly explain here is integration with CDS or Dataverse. I'm using here CDS as a name, but the new name is Dataverse. Dataverse is permits you to store and measure data used by business applications across business application. The CDS and Dataverse is normally a data source for the Power Platform, so you can use it as a data source in your application. But you can't use CDS as a standard data source for Business Central. So it's not a standard data source for Business Central. But for Business Central, you can, if you want to, Business Central integrates with CDS in different ways. And here I want to show some of the possibilities. The first possibility is if you need to create a model-driven app, for example, you can connect a CDS entity to an entity exposed by Business Central, simply by going into Power Apps, for example, select your CDS environment, click on Tables, and create a new entity. As, for example, in this example, I created the employee entity. You need to select a key. So, for example, the number. Then you can add, yes, I created a key. Important, I want to connect this employee to my Business Central employees. So, as I said before, you need to expose the entity that you want to expose as API, or data. So you need to have or an API, as said in the previous example, or also simply going into the web service page inside Business Central and select the page that you want to expose. So, for example, in this case, I'm not creating a custom API, but I'm directly exposing the employee page, that is the list of the employees inside Business Central. When exposed, so when you click Published, you have an OData URL that you can simply use. So when you have created your entity in CDS with all the fields that you want, you can click on Get Data. Get Data, you then select OData. And when select OData, you can specify the URL of the entity exposed as OData, like copied from Business Central. You select the connection credentials, and please remember to use authentication kind of organizational, because you need to connect with the organizational account. And then you have all the list of data retrieved from Business Central into the Power Query. Then you need to map these fields that come from Business Central to your Business Central, to your CDS entity. So the last step is to map the fields that comes from Business Central on the left side to the fields that are defined into the CDS entity. When mapped, you can specify a refresh parameter. The refresh can be manually triggered or automatically triggered. So, for example, automatically triggered every 5 minutes. And this permits you to have an entity created in CDS that is in sync with what you have in Business Central. So if you click on Data, you have all the list of your employees defined in Business Central. You have different views that you can specify with different details. As you can see here, I have the list of the entire employees read from my Business Central and synced with CDS. So other applications can directly connect to this CDS environment and interact with Business Central. Another important type of integration between Business Central and Dataverse or CDS is directly from the user applications. So Business Central integration, there's a Business Central integration that you can integrate directly from the application, and that permits you to make a connection, direct connection to a common data service environment, and then associate a Business Central company with a CDS business unit. This is important if you have a scenario where you want to allow multiple companies to connect to a CDS environment, for example. To do that, you need to do a setup from the application. So in the assisted setup in Business Central, you have a new setup available. This is called Setup Common Data Service Connection. When you execute this, you need to specify your URL of the CDS environment, and you need to sign in with a user that has the permission as security role administrator of your CDS environment. When connected, you need to provide credential for the user account that is used for synchronizing entities. Then you need to select an ownership model. So who is the owner of the application, this data? It can be team or person. Normally team if you want to use as a company-wide synchronization. Then click on Show Sync Recommendations, and you have all the entities that are synchronized and the type of synchronization that you have, if it be directional or not. You can specify them. And then you need to execute the when we have defined that you can if you go to the Common Data Service connection setup page inside Business Central, you can see that you have a connection with details of your environment that is enabled, and you need to run a full synchronization. If you click on Run Full Synchronizations, you can specify what type of entities synchronize, and when the synchronization starts, you have a log of all the entities that are synchronized and what happens during the synchronizations. You can also specify to sync only specific entities and applies sync filters on the entities that you want to synchronize, because this is quite common. So to do that, you can go into the integration table mappings page in Business Central, and then for each entities synchronized with the CDS, you can specify a table filter. So the filter that happens to the entity in Business Central for synchronization. So for example, I don't want to synchronize all my contact, but only the contact that have some applies to some filters or so and so on. And you can also select the fields that you want to synchronize. So not all fields, but if you click on fields, mapping fields, you can specify the fields that you want to synchronize, and not only. And you can also manually synchronize a particular entity. So if you go on the entity, the customer card, for example, you can click on Navigate, Common Data Service, and then click on Synchronize, because maybe it's a customer that I just inserted now and I want immediately to synchronize to CDS. You can do that also manually by go to synchronize in the Navigate Common Data Service Synchronize menu, and then if you have not coupled this customer record with this customer, the customer entity, for example, with your CDS entity, you are prompted to create a coupling, and then you can define the coupling if not done that before. And then you can your entity is synchronization is executed, and then in CDS you have your entity that is created. So for example, if I have a CRM system, you can see that the entity is created automatically into the CDS system. So quite powerful. And this is useful also if you need to create model-driven apps. Model-driven apps are apps driven by data models. You can create entities in CDS, sync to entities in Business Central, and then you can define model-driven apps. So when you define a model-driven apps, you have normally 3 design phases. The first is model your business data. So connect your business, create an entity and map that entity to Business Central. Then you can define your business processes and build the apps. And you have, for model-driven apps, you have an integrated designer where you can specify the entities, you can specify the sitemap, and all the views that you want. So normally, the app designer is where you create the applications. The sitemap is where you specify the navigation of your app. And the form designer is where you specify data entry fields for your entities. And then you have the view designer where you specify the list of records that is displayed into your application. So model-driven apps are quite useful if you want to directly create applications connected to your data models that you can have, and we'll see later. An important last feature that I want to mention here is that Business Central has a new feature currently in preview, but actually working, that permits you to expose entities, not like entities connected to to CDS entities, but like virtual entities. So you can create virtual entities and not reside in common data service, but they continue to be live in Business Central, and these are only seen as virtual inside CDS. And with the virtual entities, you can create, read, and update and delete operation on all your entities, and all the APIs that you expose in Business Central, so all your standard entities and all your custom entities you can define are natively exposed as virtual entities. This permits you to don't duplicate data between CDS and Business Central, but data resides in Business Central, and CDS see that data. When you create a Business Central CDS, the first thing you need to do is to install this app from the store, the Business Central virtual entity. When you install this app, an application is registered into your Azure AD tenant. This application is called Business Central Virtual for Virtual Entities, and it's enabled. In CDS, if you search your entities inside your CDS environment connected, you have a new entity called Business Central Virtual Data Source Configuration. And if you click on that entity, you have the detail, you can specify the details of the connections. So what is your environment and what is your company? And if you select that entity, you can see that if you go on data, you can see all the virtual entities that are synced with BCDS. You can see all the virtual entities that you can see, and then also you can define fields. So it's quite important, because in this way you are not mapping entities, CDS entity with a Business Central entities, but you are directly see an entity exposed from Business Central as virtual entity in CDS. So no data duplications and so on. So I'm quite out of time now. Close the PowerPoint. No. What I want I hope that this was an overview of what you can do with CDS and with Power Automate and Power Apps. Together with Business Central. Fortunately, now we have a very powerful and complete integration also with the Business Central ERP. Thanks for joining this session. I hope that if you are really working in the ERP world, now you have a more complete overview of what you can do. Enjoy the Power Platform French Summit, and thanks for attending.